The last presentation before our 20-minute break is Financial Institutions Expert Examinations, the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Mr. Hatchett and Mr. Strunk will make the presentations.
Kentucky's Financial Institutions Expert Examinations, FIX, strengthens the first line of defense against bank failure. FIX reassures all of us who were shaken by the $150 billion savings and loan bailout that properly trained, well-supported examiners can indeed help preserve bank safety and soundness. In the wake of that crisis, there is one remaining truth, and that is the primary safety and soundness vehicle is the examination, which is still driven by individual examiner judgment. Far from replacing human judgment, FIX instead employs technology to conserve experience, to reform instruction, and to empower examiners. FIX conserves experience by capturing in a knowledge base the skills of the best and the longest tenured examiners, and through artificial intelligence technology, making that expertise available to all examiners regardless of experience. This expert coaching of field staff reduces examination time and expense and frees the best examiner resources to focus on banking trouble spots and other consumer protection issues which are the regulator's responsibility. Equally important, every dollar a bank does not spend for examination can be lent in its community. FIX reforms instruction, bringing structure and discipline to on-the-job training. FIX immediately confronts trainees with protocols establishing relationships among discrete bank performance measures, juxtaposing examiner conclusions with expert system rationale, and imparting thoroughness and consistency to the examination. Before FIX, a trainee could become the manager of an examination in 3 to 5 years. FIX prepares a trainee to become an examiner in charge in 2 years. FIX empowers new examiners because it promotes an initial understanding of the intellectual process that is examination and provides tools that help them avoid mistakes attributable to inexperience. Indeed, all examiners empower themselves because it is their collective experience that provides FIX expert knowledge. FIX thus profoundly changes the culture of examination authority, and this really is the germ of our innovation. On-site examiners first explain and defend their analyses not to their bosses and not to defensive bank boards, but to the expert system rationale of their own collaborative creation. How easy is it to replicate FIX, and why would other examination staffs want to do so? FIX is personal computer-based and readily replicable to all field examiners. FIX's modular design is transferable among the differing examination norms of multiple jurisdictions. FIX is portable, interactive, and user-friendly. Regulators can adopt FIX's improved analytical and documentary standards without changing their own enshrined forms and procedures or introducing alien concepts. The innovation embodied in FIX is not simply technological, but is organizational and cultural, going far beyond word processing and spreadsheets. FIX harnesses technology for the purpose of improving the quality of human judgment in bank examination. Finally, and most important, that human judgment under public charge must assure safe and sound banks so that people will have access to credit, financial products and services, and economic development in their communities. FIX is an innovative ally in carrying out that mission.
Dr. Strunk, do you want to take...
I'll just field questions.
All right. Starting with Ellen.
This is perhaps an unfair question because it goes beyond the bank industry, but I was intrigued as I read the application by whether you had thought through whether this was transferable to other fields. The two that came to mind for me were child welfare. This just shows where, the work I do, and OSHA. Whether there are, because you run a decentralized off-site analytic process, that's how it gets described, and it strikes me that there are other decentralized off-site analytic processes. Have you thought at all about whether this could make the leap?
Yes, I think it could.
What would it take?
I think probably it would take, since you have essentially a different set of rules, a different set of procedures, it would take a development project. But it wouldn't really be, you sort of, the tools that we use. I mean, you don't have to be an ace programmer, to do it. I wouldn't consider myself an ace programmer at all. I'm a PhD in Middle Eastern history. I mean,
I would simply add that insurance regulation is one area that comes to mind, especially for us. We are going through a problem in our state with regard to the failure of an insurance company, and the notion is that if the insurance industry had a product or a technique like this, that it might be very helpful.
Let me be sure that I have all of the questions. I think we've got a lot of them coming. Would you raise your hands, those of you who have questions? I think I could better ask who doesn't, but let's start with Antonio.
In another life, I get a lot of comments about inflexible regulators in the banking industry. What benefits, quantifiable benefits to the banks or savings and loans have you been able to document?
We have been able to reduce the cost of training examiners, and we have been able to reduce the cost of the actual examination proper because we reduce the number of examiners we send into a project. Banks pay an hourly rate for their examinations, and through the use of FIX and the coaching that goes on with it, we've been able to reduce the number of examiners we have to send and the length of time they spend in the financial institution.
And I think another benefit you're talking about, inflexibility. One of the reasons people say inflexibility, there's a rating scheme. Banks are rated by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and an examiner might rate a bank's earnings as a 3, and the banker asks, well, why am I 3? He says, well, I've seen 3s all my life. Believe me, you're a 3, and that's it. This process basically, through the use of the technology and sort of capturing the actual reasoning steps and bits and pieces of that, actually opens that up. And you can say, well, you're a 3 because of this, this, and that. And it makes the process actually more open to the banker, so they might still argue, but at least they can understand where we're coming from.
Luis?
Would you elaborate further as to how, not why, but how FIX is not solely a software innovation?
I think it basically changes the approach to the way examinations are actually conducted. When I first went into a bank to watch a bank examination being performed, it was clear that what the examiners were doing was writing the report. They weren't necessarily examining the bank. They were concerned about what the end product was going to look like and not so much about what was going to go into it. Through the use of this tool, you focus on examining the bank, and writing the report becomes a byproduct.
We have 4 questions in 1 minute, so I would urge the questioners to make the questions short and the responses even shorter. Let's start with Max.
Could you explain, and my question's brief, but the answer may be longer, had this been in place during some of the banking problems a few years ago, what would have been different?
I think the examiners who were hung out to dry when they came in with their backs, when they actually reported the problems, the field examiners, they would have had more tools that would have made it tougher for their management to ignore their recommendations.
Margot?
I wondered how you got agreement on what the principles should be that were kind of embedded in this software.
Interviews with our examiners and a lot of arguing and, and hollering and screaming back and forth. Actually, it's, actually there was a fair bit of agreement from our best people, the people that we used on what was really critical.
Jack? Did you? And Hubert?
How would you respond to the cynic that would say to you that the Comptroller's Office of the Control of the Currency and the Federal Reserve have regulated banks to the point that the banking community has limited their loans? There's been efforts in Washington to reduce the amount of regulation, that this really constitutes a layer of unnecessary regulation that will give the impression that it is making a difference when in fact the real reason for the crash that we experienced in the savings and loan industry was the portfolios for the banks were not being adequately examined. Our property had been put up as assets, the market had declined, and the value of the property was still being kept at the same level because they were not making the assessments on a proper basis. So I guess my question is that the system seems very sophisticated. It constitutes another layer of regulation. Really doesn't get at the heart of the matter, which is an individual examination of the portfolios, which must be done by the bank. Isn't it superfluous given the role that the Comptroller's Office of the Currency is playing in the Federal in the Fed?
Well, first of all, the Comptroller of the Currency is not charged with the examination of the banks that we examine, and also we're not imposing an additional a layer of regulation. We're simply performing the regulation, that we've always done in a better, more efficient, less intrusive manner. And this system is very much a work in progress. And what you're talking about will be our assets module to assist examiners in the process of evaluating securities and loan portfolios.
Could I add, in response to that, that part of the criticism of the federal regulatory structure in banking has been that it creates meaningless paper trails. There's not really effective examination and supervision. FIX is a perfect example of an innovation at the state level that in fact